from the Mercy One studio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.
Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are coming to you from Iowa in the United States of America at Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. We are brought to you by Mercy College of Health Sciences, as we always are. We want to thank them for underwriting the show out there at Mercy College, where I am the Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives and the Director of the newly founded Center for Human Formation. Bud, what do you do out at Mercy College?
I'm the Academic Dean, and yesterday we were practicing for commencement ceremony, which is next week, and those always sneak up on me.
That's right. All of a sudden you blink and it's April, and then, like you said, next week we got people graduating. One more virtual one. We're a little bit more prepared. Last year, COVID really took everybody surprise, so we did it online, and I think we threw it together as best we could. This one, a lot of planning, nice backgrounds. We have all stuff to say. You're practicing saying names.
Yeah, a cool thing about our community is that people come from all over the place, but that makes these jobs a little bit harder because there's a vast variety of names to practice and learn.
That's right. So Bud and I were practicing our parts. I don't have so many names. I have to do prayers because I get to fill in as the prayer guy when we don't have the ability to get clergy there. But we were searching for regalia, which I'm guessing some people think when you're in the academic world, they're like, oh, those dorks must really like putting on regalia. It is not true. Regalia is a weird thing, I have to say, Bud.
Yeah, regalia, I don't know. I could take or leave it. I do think some might get into it more than I do. A couple years ago, or a few years ago, I should say, I was tabbed to carry the mace. Mm-hmm. Not what you spray in people's eyes, but some sort of, it's like a traditional
emblem.
Yeah, I guess, what do kings have?
I think they have scepters, right?
Scepters.
And then below that is mace, which, funny enough, does come from the actual weapon of mace, but then they made it ceremonial, right? So it's like the man-at-arms, in the royal court, right? I think Mercy's mace could do some damage if you really needed it.
Yeah, needless to say, it looks really cool. It's kind of got like a Mercy logo, and then surrounding that is, maybe it's supposed to be symbolic of the sun, but it looks like a really vicious throwing star.
That's right.
So for 2 hours of time, I felt important in my robes holding that mace.
Yeah, the one thing I have to say, regalia, like you said, take or leave it. It's not. I mean, it's nice. It's nice to see all the different places where people went to school and things like that. But I will say, if you're up there in the spotlight, wearing a long black robe, it makes you sweat more than people really probably want to know.
I always commit to losing weight on stage. I don't know from commencement to commencement how I'm doing, but yeah, it's don't lock your knees under those glaring lights with the black robes on.
That's right. The only exception, right, of course, is the people who boldly decide that if you're going to get a PhD from their place, you have to get a robe that's very different from black. Like I know that people who went to one of the grad schools, went to Duke, like they have a very solid blue one. I think someone around here, might be Iowa State, does like red. And those robes, when they're, I don't know, all black robes, you kind of like overlook them. When they're another color, you're like, that's a lot of one color.
Yeah, it is fun, and commencement each year is a time, I think, to step back and really celebrate and recognize what our students have accomplished. And I always feel proud as a sort of father to send them out into the world and to know, the health profession is getting a lot of great newbies.
Yep. So if you are interested in eventually being able to participate in a Mercy College graduation ceremony, because that means that you rightfully and fitfully and dutifully filled all of the requirements to get one of those degrees, you can go look at mchs.edu. Mercy College, who underwrites the show. mchs.edu, of course, that means we're finishing up a spring semester. but we're getting ready to start a summer one, and definitely for the fall. But I don't want to make any sort of future prophecies. If there's anything last year taught us is to not prophesize too far into the future. Yeah. But I do think fall 2021 really is going to allow us to have, I really hope that gets to be a new chapter in higher education and getting things back. I don't know if anything will ever be normal again, but to really step with a new foot into a new academic year. Well, like you said, Bo, we've all been chastened about making too bold of predictions about the future, but just on a on a more basic level, it does feel like we've turned the corner a bit with we've made it through Lent, celebration of Easter. This last Sunday, of course, was Divine Mercy Sunday. Things are starting to bloom, which is why I may have a little tickle in my voice this morning. Here, but I think there is a certain hopefulness in the air, and that's part of our conversation for this morning, not only thinking back to Divine Mercy Sunday and all the implications there, but talking about one of our favorite topics. That's right. Baseball. Oh, I was going to say the Cubs probably losing. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it starts to be the season, right, of trash talking for baseball. You have two Cardinals fans running a show in Des Moines. I know that's not good for people, but I think that we're pretty judicious about the hardship of the Cubs usually. Don't you say, Bud? There's something penitential about being a Cubs fan, so I admire my Catholic converts that embrace that cross. No, but people have said, you guys talk about sports. Why don't you have a sports show? And by people, I mean Bud and I. And so we're going to do that today, and we're going to talk about how baseball itself actually serves as a metaphor for a lot of the social justice and common good things that we talk about all the time. So that's what we're going to talk about here on The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. So, folks, here we are making big ol' claims about the baseball season. And if you want to, appropriately call us out on it, you can use the zip whip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150, hashtag UCG for the uncommon good. But it is baseball season, so we would love to hear your predictions or the smack talk. Just remember, if I'm not mistaken, Bud, right, the Cardinals had 14 runs yesterday, right? Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah, so maybe taper what you're going to say, but if you have something to say, Cubs fans, the zip whip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150, hashtag UCG for the uncommon good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr here on Iowa Catholic Radio. Stick around, and we'll be back right after this.
Thank you, Golden Rule Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, for sponsoring my show. John Lee and Eddie in the morning on Iowa Catholic Radio. Golden Rule, servicing Des Moines for over 15 years. They obey the rules to live by, especially the Golden Rule. Online at goldenrulephc.com.
Thanks to Blessman International for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Every year, Blessman International leads teams of Central Iowans to share the compassionate heart of Christ with orphans and vulnerable children in South Africa. You can learn more and sign up for a trip at blessmaninternational.org.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. BigRedQ-Des Moines.com.
Thank you, Dental Associates, for supporting Dowling Catholic Sports 365. Dental Associates, addressing your smile, needs, and dreams. 515-225-6742. Online at Des Moines-DentalAssociates.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Storm Alert Weather is provided by Divine Treasures. Divine Treasures is a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community for over 25 years. Divine Treasures, 5701 Hickman Road, Des Moines, 515-255-5230. Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and John Lee and Eddie in the morning provided by Bell Construction.
Bell Construction is a roofing company. They specialize in residential re-roofs, like commercial jobs. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494. Bell Construction.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Faith on Trial provided by Paul Martin and Paul Mitchell, owners of Imogene Ingredients. Imogene Ingredients supply specialized feed ingredients for livestock and pet diets to improve maternal and young animal health in both conventional and organic production.
Back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you this Wednesday. Thank you for joining the show. So, Bud, at the top of the show, I made a joke and said that the people have been bellowing for a sports show, and then I acted like no one has. It's not quite true. If you've been a long-time listener, you remember that we used to do great moments in church history, and we sort of did that in the tune, as it were, of sports announcing. And then we're always sort of kind of bringing up sports to make sure that we can poke a few jabs at our friends and the teams they follow. But I will say that there are people who have pointed out that they thought you and I would have interesting things to say about sports. The only other one I've heard is my children have said, Bo, you should, or Dad, of course, they said, Dad, you should host an hour-long show where you get to play whatever music you want. And I said, of course, you're right, children. I have impeccable music taste, and it would be absolutely interesting. But Jimmy's shaking his head, so I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, Bud. But we're not going to, of course, talk about sports just to, like, break down sports. We want to talk about sports to, of course, edify the topic that we keep talking about. Common good, social justice, church teaching, everything like that. But it makes sense as as is usually the case. Easter comes along, and it means that it's about time for baseball to get really started. So we've had a few, was it a week or two of baseball that's officially happened?
Yeah, I think we're going on 2 weeks. It's, April 1st.
So, of course, one of the nice things about baseball is the first month barely counts. You usually can't tell a lot from it. So baseball really kind of like gets rolling, and then you can talk about it really by the time May comes around. But to be fair, the idea behind talking about baseball and Catholic social teaching is not just to sort of make a silly gimmick. Part of this is to say, to look at American traditions that I think we can say is constitutive of what we do. What part of our American traditions are indicative of our social life, but also something worthy to talk about. And I think baseball is quintessential American summer understanding of itself. And I think what we were getting at before we started the show, Bud, is that baseball, if you start to think about it, serves not only as a useful metaphor, but there's something, I think you were going to say, profoundly Catholic about what baseball's like that maybe can help us demonstrate how things that we think are inimical or polar opposites or don't belong together actually do. So let's get this started. What do you mean, Bud, when people say, when you say baseball has a Catholic aspect to it?
Well, my own relationship to baseball has been more of a journey. So I grew up, you and I are similar in age. I grew up in an era where baseball card collection was a huge deal, like in my neighborhood. And so I remember the joy and the anticipation of like buying a pack of baseball cards for 35 cents at the drugstore and ripping off the cellophane, and then there'd be like
horrible gum,
a stick of gum in the middle, and it would sometimes like ruin a card because it would leave like the gum patch, and then the guy at the collectible store would tell you it was worthless. But so that was a big deal to me. Weirdly enough, my first baseball card that I ever got was Chili Davis, who great player. I sent him some cards and he signed them and sent them back. So I mean, he seemed like a humble guy and everything, but he played for the San Francisco Giants. And today I would never root for a San Francisco team. I don't know. I'm just not a huge fan of the city. I mean, God bless the people that live there.
Right.
But I'm more regional in my attachments and things. But I rooted for the Giants until I should have looked up the exact year, but I think early 90s there was a strike. Mm-hmm. And it really turned me off. I don't know. I guess I was a budding social justice warrior. It was just like these greedy guys, like taking away the joy of summer. So I went away from the game. There is a point to this narrative until we moved to St. Louis in 2008. And people in St. Louis joke that it's a beer town with a baseball problem. And it's just it's a part of the culture there. And so if you're going to listen to sports radio, if you're going to have conversation over the water cooler, you have to watch the Cardinals or just extract yourself completely and live off the grid. So I really started following the Cardinals, and that's where it was kind of nice because I was approaching middle age, and I kind of fell in love with baseball again. And I can unpack this further, but with your comment about like me saying it's a quintessentially Catholic sport, it harkens back to what we talked about, I think, on last week's episode about Sabbath time. so many sports, and I love watching football, I love watching basketball, but they take place within a confined space and a clock that's ticking down. So it kind of has that Protestant work ethic where you have like a finite amount of time and you're trying to accomplish something concrete real quickly or whatever. Whereas baseball, it truly takes place at a ballpark. And, you know, I've been kind of annoyed by these gimmicks from Major League Baseball to speed the game up, because when I take time out of my day to go to the ballpark, the joy of it in part is that it feels like time sort of expands almost to there. I mean, theoretically, a baseball game could go on forever, and the dimensions of the park are unique to each stadium. So they're not these sort of confines that you see in other sporting events. It has this sort of openness, a real liturgical element with some of the pomp and like the traditions about which music is played when.
Unwritten rules, oral tradition, all these things like that.
Very communal. You know, it's truly a sport where you can go to a game and take in the game and appreciate it, but have like this authentic conversation with the people around you. So a lot of things that I love about it.
The other thing, well, I mean, there's so many things to bring up. For instance, baseball is totally different. It's a performance to go watch it live than to watch it on. Like, you can be a fan of baseball games, like my wife, and have no interest in baseball overall. Like, she doesn't want to watch a game on TV, but she loves taking the kids to go to baseball. And by the way, just a real quick, hot take on that. It's funny that everyone wants to speed baseball up, but basically the most popular sport in America, football, everybody tries to make it baseball, right? Tailgating is just the baseballification of football, and I know no one likes to doesn't think about it that way. But the idea that you would go spend an entire day doing something, that's exactly the point. I think of Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and you might think I'm crazy to bring up like such a sort of classic understanding of sort of theology and philosophy, but James Shaw, Father James Shaw, rest in peace, what a wonderful Jesuit thinker and political thinker. He's wrote this about sports and said exactly what Joseph Pieper is getting at about leisure, something that American culture, in its sort of economic moments, wants to destroy, right? We don't have leisure anymore. You need to like take 2 days off so that you can rest, so you can get back to work and work hard the 5 days, or maybe even 6 days, or 80 hours, right? We're always on the impulse to work. For a lot of people, sports, and a sport like baseball, is one of the few near religious, not real religious, I'm not acting like it is, near religious elements in their life where they understand that there's something like unstructured time, deep devotion, like you said, liturgical-esque movements. Now, on one hand, you can say, and you can go read old books and stuff that go, oh, well, sports is replacing religion. But it might be the case that at some point in American history, sports did that. Yeah. But my only contention now is sports might be, for some, the first step back into something like liturgical time. And I go back to what you were saying, making this personal. As an evangelical growing up, I had far more of a sort of preparatoria evangelium for Catholic understanding of liturgy from baseball than I did from my own Christian upbringing. And I don't mean that to bash. I mean, there's so much that being evangelical helped me on my journey when I became Catholic. But I'll have to say the idea of there being seasons and movements and things like that, baseball and innings and things like that was so much more the sort of architecture that allowed me to enter into liturgical time and leisure time and the things we're talking about than actual going to church. Yeah. There's a way in which, and this will, I want to back up and say, I love basketball. Football probably is my favorite sport, to be honest, but I think baseball is exactly like you said, the best sport in this regard. But let's be honest, in a way, every basketball game is the same. Yeah. And has its, you can extend time a bit with like timeouts and stuff like that. But like the idea about that baseball can literally take we don't know how much time it would take. It's like you said, what a wonderful idea that exactly kicks against, with the spurs against American ideas. Like America's like, no, how do we make this into an efficient package? And the point of baseball is to not be efficient. The point of baseball is to take too much time. And I think that idea of a royal waste of time, that there's things worth wasting our times with, if you understand that in a secular way with baseball, you can maybe start to understand it with liturgical time in the church.
Well, I think football can sometimes take on the pomp and circumstance of Catholic liturgy. So when I'm at a football game that I really love, it's kind of reminiscent of like a really well orchestrated like Eucharistic procession with some of the colorful nature of it and the noise and the way things are sort of organized. With baseball, it's very contemplative, and you kind of go to the ballpark, and like you said, you lose your sense of time. It's very communal. But I think even digging into the sports, and this is where I hope one of my sons is interested in baseball, there's a lot to take away in terms of discipleship, because when you first start teaching a young person how to play baseball, some of the skills seem odd. It's the sort of like muscle memory that's maybe not going to be useful in other parts of life, but it's what others have said about the virtues. They're kind of ends in themselves. So there's not like we're talking about like this clear productive element to something, but you're immersed in the sport to become a master at it. I think we have to start thinking about that way about discipleship, where when we transmit the faith, when we gift the faith to young people or to those like our neighbors whom we meet or whatever, it's not like we can take 75 bullet points and laminate them and say, here, like read this and memorize this. Hopefully there's something kind of goodly difficult about, that was a terrible syntax, but about the faith, where you're not going to fully know and understand the graces that God has given us through the work of Jesus Christ unless you totally immerse yourself and you learn the language of the faith, and you practice the skills of the faith, so to speak, over time.
Right. I think about how the best hitters hit the ball a third of the time. And I think I've had this discussion before in teaching ethics, when people go, they get this idea that Christianity or just virtue ethics is about a sort of perfectionism. And I go, well, look, you can have a good at-bat and not get on base.
Yeah.
Right? Hitting the ball out of the park is even harder. But this idea that, like, the best among us really get it, really hit the ball a third of the time, but that doesn't mean that the rest of your at-bats are wasted or bad, is a good lesson to learn about the moral life and how we live. But, so there's the historical, there's the discipleship element, like you said, the historical element. I think about how being a Cardinals fan for me goes back to the fact that my mom grew up listening to Bob Gibson on AM radio, because in Oklahoma, the Cardinals was the only team that you heard. Yeah. So you have a lot of Okies that are Cardinals fans. I grew up wanting to be Ozzie Smith because he was an awesome defensive shortstop, and he could do flips on the field. That was awesome. And so, you can start seeing how people bring in the generations of their family about who they love and why they do that. But then I even think about the way it's constituted, but that baseball is strangely both individual and communal.
Yeah.
And when we start talking about the common good, I actually think baseball is a really good metaphor just to talk about the common good, because the common good, remember, is not the aggregate good, nor is it essentially even the collective good. It is the good of the individual that can only be had in common with everyone. And, Bud, that's what baseball is.
Yeah.
So each position, right, you can be, when the ball is in play, there's a way in which you are by yourself in a certain way, right? The pitcher's pitching, the hitter's trying to hit, I'm trying to field it, I'm trying to throw it, I'm trying to base run. There's something individual, but on the other hand, your individual participation and even your individual good can't make sense unless it is shared in common with everyone else. Baseball, I was trying to think about this. Is there any other major sport where they have something like a sacrifice fly?
Yeah, I can't think of one where you almost achieve something important by doing what's normally a failure.
Right. I mean, so chess, there's an element of chess live in baseball that even when we say, like, it's a chess match with, like, football or basketball, it doesn't really work the same, right? Like, you move fielders around, right? You mean to hit this way. This guy's a left-hander. I'm going to throw a right-hander. The sort of, strategy involved in that. So I think that element too, right? In the faith, we have our individual piety, but it only makes sense if it is a piety held in common.
Yeah.
And baseball, I think, in a way, is the most natural metaphor for a lot of people to sort of understand how that works, that we're not saved individually and we're not saved as a clump, we're saved in common, and that both takes individual and communal effort.
There are individual sports where great athletes can sort of impose their will. I think of like the Williams sisters in tennis.
Right.
And they can be so much better than the other player that they just dominate the sport. You kind of approximate to that with basketball. So basketball is certainly very much a team sport. But if you have a great player like Michael Jordan, he can kind of take over the game. The closest you get to that in baseball is a dominant pitcher. But still, I just think, like you said, it's the perfect blend of individual and communal. And you get that especially if you go to the ballpark, because you start to see the shifts on defense and how much is going. Like you were saying, watching on TV, they give you a perspective of the pitcher throwing to the batter. At the park, it's almost like the team becomes this like living organism that has to constantly be adjusting to what's taking place on the field. I think it's also built to skill. So when we think about part of the way that our society, I was going to say, has gone off the rails, maybe that's too extreme, but like one thing that I think we've struggled with is Americans love big things. And so a lot of times when we build our buildings or play our music or whatever, we don't think of the natural landscape that we're a part, because we have this like frontier mentality that like we have as much space as we'll ever want. That of course, like we're kind of learning again how to live locally and think about our relationship to the land. And with baseball, the dimensions, I've always thought like, how did we get this diamond or exactly 90 feet from base to base? And I think the first early players of baseball, they figured out if you're going to throw the ball and a guy's going to hit it with the bat and it ends up being a ground ball, like 90 feet is almost the perfect pace where if the fielder makes a really like exquisitely skilled play, he can get him out. But if he doesn't, the player is going to be safe. And so the dimensions of the field grew up as the sport was being played. And then, you know, early on there wasn't necessarily fences. Like the idea of hitting it out of the park, that came later, where it's like, well, if a guy, you know, hit it 400 yards, he's of course going to make it all the way to home base or whatever. And so then you started to see these things constructed to keep fans like off the field, but to allow for this idea of like the home run.
And where we put, and like we started to put them in places where people were, so we had to have a fence, and then they're not always equal. So you have, I mean, the Green Monster. You know, I don't want to give Boston credit for anything, but the Green Monster is this great thing, right? Because they just built this like wall stupidly high, and then they're like, keep it, and that's great, right? That's like so awesome, and I think that's exactly right.
The one they've phased out is in Houston. For a while, they had a berm out in center field.
Yeah.
So if it got hit deep, the outfielder actually had to like kind of run up a hill, but it was too dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, there's some stuff you have to back off a little bit for liability issues. But I mean, before we get to break, I mean, just to, like last sort of like quick stuff, and when we come back, I think we want to get into like some more of the technical aspects. But even thinking about, you know, in football, if you have a great quarterback, I mean, you have to have a bad team otherwise to lose in some ways. But like I know this will hurt, you know, Justin White, God bless you. I'm bringing up the Braves real quick. They had dominant pitchers and didn't, you know, rule the league, because you have to have that balance. I mean, here we are in April, and as Cardinals fans, we're like really excited because we have some of the best fielders we have. We have all-stars finally, and now we're worried about pitching, right? And you start to think about this in terms of the moral life, too. You can be as strong in one or two virtues if you want, but if you don't have that sort of continuity of the virtues through the whole thing, through your whole life, it's not going to matter. And so I think exactly like you said, the way in which baseball demonstrates the sort of organic but also the thoughtfulness of all this, I know that it can sound like we're dorking out, but I got to say, Bud, I think the first half of the show, we've proved that we're not just grasping at straws. And so when we get back, we'll talk more about how this baseball as a metaphor expands even more than what we're saying, and hopefully can give some conceptual framework to some of the difficult things that we constantly bring up, talking about the common good and Catholic social teaching. So this is The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around, and we'll be back right after this. Folks, if you want to be up on the news, bud, at Iowa Catholic Radio. Easy to do. Just check out our social media outreach. Go to the original website, iowacatholicradio.com. There you can listen live, sign up for stuff, do other cool things, see things, everything you'd want, iowacatholicradio.com. If you want to follow us on Facebook, just look up Iowa Catholic Radio. Befriend us on Facebook, and you'll see our posts. On Twitter, at IA Catholic Radio, to follow our tweets. And then if you would like to download the Iowa Catholic Radio app, anywhere you have data, you can listen live, listen to pre-recorded prayers, donate, do all the things that apps are wont to do. So we hope that you are able to join us and keep track of what's going on at Iowa Catholic Radio through the website, Facebook, Twitter, Iowa Catholic Radio app, and you can even do some Alexa magic if you want. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this.
Thanks to Blessman International for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Every year, Blessman International leads teams of Central Iowans to share the compassionate heart of Christ with orphans and vulnerable children in South Africa. You can learn more and sign up for a trip at blessmaninternational.org.
What is the best gift ever? Giving a Catholic education is at the top of my list. Your contribution to CTO helps families send their children to our Catholic schools who otherwise could not afford it. In giving to CTO, you receive the best tax credits ever. Pledge or donate online at ctoiowa.org. The bottom line, it's for the kids and their future.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences, where you can chart your course for more.
This is Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr from the Uncommon Good.
Mercy College provides unparalleled clinical rotations, hands-on learning, accelerated education, and flexible schedules. Since 1899, Mercy College has been transforming students into healthcare professionals. Guided by Catholic values, our faculty put classroom theory into practice. Students are prepared for roles in service and leadership throughout their own careers.
Learn more at mchs.edu.
Thank you, Caldwell Parish, for underwriting Iowa Catholic Radio. Conform to the wishes of the deceased and to Catholic liturgical burial traditions. Caldwell Parish Funeral Home, Des Moines' only Catholic-owned and operated funeral home. CaldwellParish.com.
Here's your forecast on Iowa Catholic Radio. High pressure from Canada is sending cool air our way, so things will stay a little on the cool side for the next few days, with highs only in the 50s, about 50 for the high this afternoon. It will be a little bit breezy, and we'll get a mix of sunshine and clouds. Overnight, partly cloudy, mid-30s, and then we're in the low 50s again tomorrow with mostly sunny skies. A few more clouds coming in on Friday, low to mid-50s. I'm meteorologist Steve Hamilton on Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for joining the show. We've been talking about baseball and not just about strategy or who you should... this is not a gambling show, Bud, so we are not talking about placing bets. I just want to make this very clear to the FCC and everyone who's listening. No, we're talking about baseball, and not only how we think that something deeply ingrained in it is demonstrative of Catholic reality, the sort of liturgical aspect, its history, its timelessness, its leisure, things like this. But we want to talk about how we think it serves as a useful metaphor to get people talking about concepts that might be a little bit difficult to conceptualize, at least, sort of in the more the normal way. So, but we left off talking about how baseball is individual and communal. You have to be a great individual player, but to be a great individual player is to be with the team. You see this not only with, like you said, infield shifts, meaning to throw pitches in a certain way. Right? There's a lot of expectation on defense that the defense knows what the pitcher is throwing, so there's a likelihood about where the hitter might hit it. You need to know if the catcher's going to try to throw the guy out who's stealing. And then back with batting, right, especially if you have people on, am I going to bunt? Am I going to swing away? Am I going to let the person steal? And am I going to do a sacrifice? Great individual performance only makes sense in the context of the communal one. And so there's something very foundational about Catholic piety itself that is both individual and communal, and inseparably so. What are some of the other things that baseball might help people understand when we start to talk about things that might seem in Catholic social teaching polar opposites or opposed, but maybe baseball can help us string that line.
Oh, wow. I'm going to maybe hit that question back to you. During the break, what was coming to my mind is I think baseball might be one of the most historical of sports, and the baseball nerds really get into the numbers and the history of it. It has this really thick history, and you do have almost the communion of saints. Like if you've been to Busch Stadium in St. Louis, those who excelled at the sport, we kind of memorialize them around the stadium. Are you relatedly a fan of sabermetrics? Because for myself, I love getting into the statistics and the numbers, but we talked about sort of the open-endedness and free-willing nature of baseball. And sabermetrics, it starts to lean towards almost I feel like there's almost like this kind of predetermination about what's going to happen where we crunch the numbers so minutely that we start saying well, this guy gets on base a certain percentage of the time or something.
No, I think that starts to be interesting and precisely when we try to apply it to the social sphere. So in baseball, sabermetrics, for people who don't know, if you've ever seen the movie Moneyball or read the book, or you've heard people talk about the sort of number crunching that's possible. Yeah. So what is this person's tendencies? So, he hits this way this many times against a right-handed pitcher or a left-handed pitcher.
Historically, we would look at things like average. So how often did a guy, when he come to the plate, get on base? But now they do wins above replacement. Yeah. So when this guy plays, on average, how many wins does he produce for your team above an average, the average of all baseball players?
Absolutely. And so, one of the things that's interesting about this in social life is it's absolutely good that we're able to quantify certain aspects of social relations in a way that we never could. So, you think of very basic stuff. If you only have a limited amount of resources and we need to go, what can we do on the ground to help this community improve? Mm-hmm. And, people have done stuff it's hard for people to get to grocery stores here, right? Their percentage of availability for food is a lot less than maybe this person in this neighborhood. So we use numbers for good. The problem starts to be, right, and this shows up in baseball, you can do numbers all you want, but what are the great stories in baseball and what do they teach us, right? So again, as Cardinals fans, Bud, remember, so this goes back into history. One of the seeds planted in Bud's soul for becoming a Cardinals fan, I want to say, is you and your dad came to visit Stillwater, Oklahoma when my wife and I lived there. We went and watched Oklahoma State play Nebraska, but on TV, what did we watch? Well, we watched the Cardinals win the World Series. This is 2007. Yes. So, but if you remember, who was the MVP for the Cardinals that year?
Well, see, I wasn't a huge baseball fan then because I hadn't moved to St. Louis yet, but the figure that stands out is Albert Pujols, the Hall of Fame.
Right. So he's the guy that you would think, right? Yeah. Albert Pujols, big guy. But it was little shortstop Eckstein, who diminutive even, and not even the best player at all, but he had just a series for the ages, right?
Yeah.
We have the Sports Illustrated down in my mom's basement, I think, where the celebrates his win. Because, of course, baseball is also replete with people who, against the numbers, defy the odds. And so it's like you said, there's a lot we can learn from numbers. There's a lot we can learn from being attentive to averages and things like this. But, of course, one of the things that's really important is, like you said, the freedom involved. And so we don't predetermine what people do. We can sort of adjust how we try to affect social change by looking at something like the sabermetrics of life. But we'll never be able to account for human freedom in exactly that way, that there is the David Eckstein moments. Now, on the other hand, it would be silly, right, to know, for instance, that you have a right-handed pitcher and that there's this left-handed batter coming up who just eats them alive. So it would be silly to be like, for freedom's sake, I'm leaving that guy out. Right? You don't want to ignore numbers either. And so, we make the silly joke that there's a lot of Catholic both and, right?
Yeah.
Catholics don't want to choose either or. There's both and. There's ways in which both elements come together. And I think that's one social element that baseball provides a good metaphor for.
I don't know when my dad visited if he shared his own, how he came around to the Cardinals. It's it's similar to what you were saying about your mom growing up in Oklahoma, and Cardinals radio affiliates really did branch out across a lot of the Midwest, like in the 50s and 60s. So my dad has these really like sort of nostalgic stories about growing up on the farm, and like a storm would be rolling in over the Missouri River, and he would be in the attic like picking up Harry Carey broadcasting Cardinals games. And it's kind of interesting to talk to him because back then the Cardinals were the Omaha was the AAA affiliate for the Cardinals, the Omaha Cardinals, and he went to Vietnam, and when he came back, it was the Omaha Royals, and he always saw that as like a sea change in America.
Yeah, and he's right.
Omaha is the Cardinals now. Now it's the Omaha Storm Chasers. They're the AAA. For a while, it was the Golden something like state. It was related to Union Pacific and the trains or whatever, but they're the Storm Chasers. But he's in his 70s now, and he's still a little bitter about them transitioning from Cardinals to Royals.
Right. I think you could go down. You could go down the line with like politicians that are angry about like what happened with their baseball teams. Like famously, Bernie Sanders is still mad about the Dodgers being moved from Brooklyn. Well, one of the Republican candidates, it was Bob Dole, I think. He was mad about something with that. So, at any rate, like there's a lot of like people getting into politics because of other baseball teams got moved. So I kind of understand that.
Yeah, but Catholicism really is the religion of the both and we experienced this last Sunday with Divine Mercy Sunday. And, of course, this devotion has really picked up in recent years, in a lot of ways through John Paul II promoting it. But and then, of course, Pope Francis has preached and taught a lot about divine mercy. This is another area in life where I think we're prone to see a strict dichotomy. So there's either justice in those who uphold that strict cause, or mercy. And mercy in our minds can be sort of this sentimentalized or flattened concept of just like, well, someone's done wrong, and then we sort of wipe the slate clean, and that's the end of the story. In Catholic theology, traditionally, these are always seen as two sides of one coin. So God's mercy, of course, is not opposed to God's justice. The fact that we're unable to see that, I think, is because we often we may have mentioned this parable on the show recently, but the man who's forgiven an enormous amount by a king and then goes out and tries to shake someone down for a few dollars and throws them into prison. But oftentimes our own personal conceptualization of mercy is warped, and we're more prone to see the offenses against us and think others owe us a great deal. God, of course, has forgiven us. I mean, we could speak about it infinitely. To sin once is to offend divine justice. And so, I mean, I think this coming off of Easter is a good reminder of how these two concepts are wedded.
Yeah, and in fact, mercy is the highest form of justice because, of course, justice is about giving each what they're due. And when it comes to rectifying injustices, that is to say, if I've done an injustice to someone, I've prevented them from receiving what they're due, it's within the right of the person to not ask back exactly what was due them. And this gets back to, if we've been forgiven, we should forgive as well. But of course, mercy is not primarily human-centric first. It's God who is merciful. So when God doesn't exact the sort of pound of flesh for like a specific injustice, that's because he has a higher justice in mind. And of course, that higher justice is that God deserves a choir in heaven. He deserves as many people in heaven worshiping him as possible. And but it's not just simply, I mean, God doesn't need those worshipers either, because he's God, and so he's self-fulfilled all his own. But because of his love is effusive, what's more just for God? Well, for God, what does he want to receive most? It's not that he needs anything. So what he wants the most is for his goodness to be as effusive as possible. So his mercy is actually the highest form of justice, even for him, right? Mm-hmm. Because what does God owe? What is owed God the most? And it's for his goodness to go as far afield as possible. And so we emulate that. But like you said, when we slice the sort of pie too thin, we'll get it twisted and think that, oh, well, I'm owed this, and so when I forgive, I must be throwing justice out the door. But of course, when we forgive, and like not cheap grace, but forgive truly, we are building something more important, which is a community of the forgiven. We're bringing people back when we do those things. Now, you might go, what does this have to do with baseball? But it goes back, again, to sabermetrics, or just the sort of trick between everything being determined or everything being utterly free. There's so much in all sports, really, but with baseball in particular, that you can imagine that the good of any sort of batter every time they're up to bat is to swing for the fences and try to score. And if you're an outfielder, right, and you can get to the ball, try to throw them out. There's so many ways in which if you sort of get tunnel vision, that you'll miss the point that what might be seemingly good in one particular at-bat or one particular play misses the greater point, which is, of course, to win the game. And so you can imagine scenarios all over the place where people trying to do, quote-unquote, what's best in that one instance lose the capacity or make it harder for their team to win. So we talked about this with sacrifice flies, right? That, like, technically you're getting out for the sake of scoring a run, but I also think about this in terms of something like intentionally walking, where what you're trying to do is make it where you can get a double play.
Yeah. I need to think through this further. I didn't think about this before the show, so it's always dangerous to, like, tread into uncharted territory. But I think the sacrifice fly, or when you said intentional walk, where my mind actually went to was hitting a batter, especially if the reason you're hitting the batter was because the other team had plunked your own guy. Because normally you're trying to keep people off base. But with the intentional walk, with the sacrifice fly, with even hitting a batter as a kind of repercussion for a previous play, normally, like, according to the strict rules of baseball, that should be, I can't pin the right word, but like a penalty or like something negative for your team. But it actually opens up new possibilities. And I think about this in relation to grace. So when I was growing up and in an evangelical context, one thing that was told to me in Sunday school is that grace is not getting what we do deserve, and mercy is getting a gift that we don't deserve. And those capture a part of the concept, but I would say that idea of grace falls short if the idea, again, is that the idea is just like wiping the chalkboard clean, because grace in the Catholic understanding is not only forgiveness for sins, but the power to live a new life. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, the classic example of this in the Gospels, of course, is the woman caught in adultery. And when the religious leaders want to stone that woman, I'd have to go back to the text, but I don't think Jesus is chucking out the law. He's saying, yes, according to a strict application of the law, this would be the case. Mm-hmm. But he challenges those there to think, could any one of us survive, of course, excepting himself, a strict application of the law? Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Of course, I think as Catholics, we don't want to end our understanding and preaching the parable at that point, because Jesus does turn to the woman and says, go and sin no more. Right. The forgiveness is not necessarily attached, like, it's not that she has to do something to earn it, but it's granted to her precisely as the sort of launching pad for a new kind of life.
I'm worried that people like just joining in will be like, I think Bud just justified pitchers hitting batters with the don't cast the first stone. Does that mean the pitchers are sinless? No.
It is one of my favorite parts of the game.
Yeah. Well, we're getting here at the end. The thing where I actually think this wraps up well, maybe you think everything we've been saying so far is just grasping at straws. But I got one that I think is truly the case where baseball could help people out. And that's the funky words subsidiarity and solidarity, which in Catholic social teaching I often seen people pit against each other. So solidarity is somehow this sort of collectivist impulse where we're all in it together, but subsidiarity is sort of a libertine individualism, don't step on my feet, let me do what I want to do. But of course subsidiarity only works when solidarity occurs, and solidarity becomes something else very different if it doesn't allow for subsidiarity. Subsidiarity, if people go, well, what do we mean? It is the idea, right, that social issues should be answered by the appropriate authority on the level in which they arise, or various versions like this. But just to say, you play a position. And baseball's unique in this. I would say that on one hand you have basketball where truly running down the court anybody can do the position. The center can be the point guard, as it were. But then in football, where there's a way in which I guess with a little bit of exceptions, right, there is sort of this lockstep, like, you are the quarterback and, things like this. In baseball, there's a way, of course, in which if the second baseman is trying to do the shortstop's job, if the pitcher is trying to do the first baseman's job, all these things to say is that things will fall apart. If you're the leadoff hitter and you're batting like your cleanup, right, these things will fall apart. But on the other hand, there is no way on earth in which that is to say that, that you can't do things like do infield shifts or that people shouldn't back each other up. You start to get into this idea, but what subsidiarity means, of course, is to say that sort of way in which individual and the whole unit work together. And so subsidiarity means that we do have our appropriate roles in society, and that we should answer, as it were, or deal with the things at the appropriate level. But solidarity imposes on us the fact that doesn't mean that our competencies would ever exclude the good that is held with everyone else. You can't not be a team player and individually excel in baseball. And I think thinking about that sort of way in which things lined up is maybe a hopeful way that going forward when people talk about subsidiarity and solidarity, there's a good way to think about that.
There's more to unpack. I'm tempted to start a baseball sub podcast, but my wife might not be behind that idea. I mean, I love the idea that the coach wears the players' uniforms.
That's right.
Yeah, you can be like a 65-year-old guy and just like rocking the uni.
I think and you're right. Like, and you go everything from like the ball boys up to. I mean, you're right. It kind of looks like if you go to, just for instance, like a traditional Latin mass, and you have like, little acolytes are sort of wearing similar things to all the way up to what the priests are wearing. No, I like that idea too.
And it's probably the sport where you can be an all-star and be the most out of shape.
That's
I think about John Kruk during the latter stages of his career.
What is it? Carlos. Who's the pitcher?
Oh yeah, for the Mets. I'm blanking.
Yes. Darn it.
Well, Babe Ruth famously
very famously
smoke cigars and drink beers before the game, and
I think that's what everybody's pointed out. Right, is that in the mythical realm of the American male's mind, it takes a long time before you go, I'm not going pro, even though you've never had a chance. I turned 40 this year, probably not going pro, but baseball always held it out. Right, like you're like, maybe if I became like really good at bunting, I could be like the guy at the end of the bench that they only like sub in when they really need to move, someone from second to third.
You have to be careful with that mindset because we formed a softball team a few years ago.
That's right.
And the day after games, I felt like I was going to die.
Oh, yeah. So my whole life, I never had problems with my hamstrings. And like playing softball when I got older, I have pulled hamstrings like 3 times. And what it is, right, is because you're on base and then you just take off running and then pop, bad news.
My church in St. Louis held a home run derby one year, and it was like 105 degrees there. It was like a Pentecostal worship service. People were just like fainting in the stands. But I was tabbed to pitch, and of course, I'm just trying to lob 40 miles per hour pitches over the plate, and the next day, my arm was about to fall off.
But yeah, that's the
weird motion.
The last thing, if you go on Twitter, I forget who it is, but one of the pitchers threw a strike at 100 miles an hour, and then like a 53 mile per hour strike, and they play them at the same time. I suggest everyone go look that up. But okay, we did that.
Sorry, at the end there, we just got
we had a
lot of fun with it.
But you know what? I think everyone here in the Des Moines area can say with us, Bud, go Cardinals. Yeah. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our families, our city, our state, our nation, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week. But after people heard that, go Cards, if they want to pray for our soul, what's the way that they can join with everyone else on Iowa Catholic Radio to pray for us?
Yeah, please do. You can join us in prayer. We pray the Rosary daily at 5:30 in the morning, 9:30 a.m., and 9:30 p.m. The Rosary is also available 24/7, 365 on the Iowa Catholic Radio app. A couple other specifically on-air broadcasts of prayer, the Angelus at 6 each day, 6 a.m., and the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3 in the afternoon.
And just to let you know what's going on Iowa Catholic Radio, the Iowa Catholic Men's Conference is Saturday, May 22nd at the Embassy Suites downtown, starting with Mass at 7 a.m. Speakers include Gary Dolphin and Tim Jameson, hosted by Joe Stopulus and John Leonetti. The Wrecking Crew, I think that's what they're going to...
oh, wow.
No, I don't. That's not what it's named, but I'm naming them the Wrecking Crew. And then also the Iowa Catholic Radio Golf Classic, presented by the Liturgical Institute, is Wednesday, June 23rd at Legacy Golf Club in Norwalk. Shotgun start at 10 a.m. Folks, this ministry extends far beyond the people who are on the radio, far beyond the people behind the boards and in the office, as good a job as they do. You are part of this ministry, so we beg you to pray for us. We thank you for your volunteer time, but also materially, of course, we stay on air through the good graces of your contribution. So if you feel inclined prayerfully in this Easter season to keep up the good work of keeping the good word of the Lord resonating through Iowa, central Iowa, and then, of course, wherever it reaches through the interwebs, please feel free to donate, 515-223-1150, to call and talk to someone about setting up a donation. You can text 515-223-1150, iowacatholicradio.com, where we have a donate button. Then, of course, if you have the Iowa Catholic Radio app, donations accepted there. Thank you for your prayers, for your volunteer times, and for your material support. But please keep us in mind so that we can keep our ministry going strong. Bud, the Boys of Summer have started, so it's always, it always lines up with Easter.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to act like there's a 1-to-1 ratio, but it is always nice to think that the Lord is risen, He's risen indeed, and baseball started.
Totally unrelated to baseball as far as I know. Happy anniversary to my parents, 48 years. So.
Great job, guys.
Yeah.
All right, this is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.